Mohamed Salah walks into an upscale boutique, expecting nothing more than a simple shopping experience. But when a store clerk sizes him up and refuses to serve him, things take an unexpected turn. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. This isn't just about a luxury watch, it's about respect, assumptions, and a moment that will be remembered forever. Stay with us until the end, and let us know in the comments. Have you ever been judged unfairly? The soft chime of the boutique's entrance bell barely made a sound as Mohamed Salah stepped inside. The store was pristine, almost unnaturally quiet, the kind of place where every movement felt magnified. The walls were lined with sleek glass cases, each one carefully displaying watches that cost more than some people's homes. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne, the unmistakable signature of high-end luxury. Salah wasn't new to places like this. He had always appreciated the craftsmanship of a fine timepiece, the delicate mechanics, the precision, the artistry. It wasn't about status or wealth. It was about the beauty of something built to last. Still, as he walked deeper into the boutique, he noticed the subtle shift in the air. A few of the sales associates looked up from their stations, their eyes flickering toward him with mild curiosity before returning to their tasks. No greeting, no polite nods. Just a glance, then nothing. He had seen this before. Dressed in a simple hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers, Salah wasn't the image of the clientele they were expecting. There were no designer logos on display, no tailored suit, no visible markers of wealth. Just a man who looked like he could be anyone. It didn't bother him, at least not at first. He was used to moving through life with quiet confidence, letting his actions speak louder than anything else. The only other customer in the boutique, an older gentleman in an expensive navy suit, was receiving the kind of attention reserved for royalty. A young sales associate hovered nearby, nodding attentively as the man examined a platinum watch under the soft glow of the showroom lights. Their laughter was low and familiar, the effortless exchange of people who understood each other. Salah took his time, moving slowly past the displays, his gaze settling on a particular piece that caught his eye. A limited edition model, sleek and understated, yet undeniably elegant. He reached the counter and waited, expecting someone to approach him. But seconds passed, then a full minute. The sales associates remained where they were, making no move to acknowledge him. A test. He stayed silent, patient, watching, as one of them, Daniel, according to his gold name tag, caught sight of him and hesitated. The hesitation was small, barely noticeable, but Salah caught it. A flicker of assessment, a silent decision made in an instant. The associate turned away, pretending to be busy. Salah exhaled slowly. He wasn't here to prove anything. He wasn't here for drama. He just wanted to see the watch. But the moment had already begun to unfold in a way he couldn't control. This wasn't about a watch anymore. This was about something else entirely. Salah ran his fingers lightly over the glass display, his eyes tracing the details of the timepiece inside. It was a beautiful watch, sleek, precise, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke without needing to be flashy. He had always admired pieces like this. Watches told stories. They carried time, history, and legacy on a wrist. But as he stood there waiting, the silence around him stretched just a little too long. A few feet away, the same young associate from before, Daniel, moved with effortless enthusiasm toward another customer who had just walked in. A tall man in a crisp navy suit, silver cufflinks flashing under the boutique's bright lights. "Good afternoon, sir," Daniel greeted warmly, his voice carrying a practiced charm. "Welcome in. How can I assist you today?" The businessman barely needed to ask before Daniel was already showcasing the boutique's finest selection, offering a smile, pouring out details about each piece with a kind of reverence that was noticeably absent when Salah had entered. Salah said nothing, but he noticed everything. He shifted his weight slightly, glancing around the store. Another sales associate stood behind the counter, meticulously polishing an already spotless glass case. Another one scrolled through a tablet, pretending to be engrossed in something important. And then there was Daniel, still locked in conversation, nodding eagerly as the businessman tried on a platinum watch. Salah exhaled slowly. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he had just caught them at a busy moment, but he knew better. It wasn't the first time he had been overlooked. Mistaken for someone who didn't belong in places like this, he had seen it before. The way wealth in certain circles wasn't just about having money, but about looking like you had it. And today, in his hoodie and jeans, Salah didn't look the part. Still, he gave them the benefit of the doubt. He kept his stance relaxed, his expression neutral, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge him. But the seconds dragged on. The warmth, the attention, the eager service, it was all reserved for someone else. Salah remained standing there, unnoticed, unimportant, invisible. Salah finally stepped forward, closing the small distance between himself and the counter. If they weren't going to acknowledge him, he'd make the first move. His fingers tapped lightly against the glass as he nodded toward the watch he had been admiring. "Can I see this one?" he asked, his voice calm, even. Daniel, the young sales associate, barely looked up. He was still engaged with the businessman in the suit, nodding as the man admired his reflection in one of the boutique's mirrors, a shimmering platinum watch on his wrist. But when Daniel finally turned his attention towards Salah, there was no warmth in his expression. No polite smile. Just a fleeting glance followed by a dismissive tone that made it clear he wasn't interested in wasting his time. "That model starts at $50,000, he said. There was no invitation in his voice, no effort to reach into the vault and retrieve the watch. Just a statement. A barrier. As if the price alone should be enough to send Salah walking back out the door. Salah held his gaze, studying him. The words weren't the problem. It was the way they were spoken. Flat, sharp. A quiet challenge laced beneath them. The assumption was clear. He doesn't belong here. He can't afford it. Salah didn't flinch, didn't react. Years of discipline, of being tested on the field, had trained him to read moments like this, to recognize the silent battles that played out long before a word was ever spoken. "I see," he said simply. He could have corrected him, could have pulled out his card, could have told him exactly who he was, could have reminded him that assumptions were a dangerous thing. But Salah didn't need to prove anything. Instead, he stood there, watching, waiting, giving Daniel the chance to realize his mistake. But Daniel only turned back toward his other customer, already forgetting him. As if Mohamed Salah had never even existed. Salah didn't move. He didn't frown, didn't sigh, didn't let the weight of Daniel's dismissive tone change the steady calm in his expression. He had dealt with worse. On the pitch, in the media, in rooms where people underestimated him before he even opened his mouth. This was nothing new. He nodded once. "Can I see it?" A simple request, nothing more. But Daniel hesitated. It wasn't the pause of someone considering their next move, it was something else. A flicker of doubt, of reluctance, of calculation. He shifted slightly, fingers adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt as his eyes darted toward the manager across the boutique, as if silently asking for permission. And then, instead of reaching into the display, instead of retrieving the watch as any associate would do for a regular customer, Daniel gave a tight-lipped smile. Forced. Unapologetic. "We only show high-value items to serious buyers." The words landed with a quiet weight, subtle but sharp, like a blade hidden beneath silk. The air around them shifted just slightly. Salah didn't react, not immediately. But the silence that followed spoke louder than anything he could have said. A man browsing at a nearby case turned his head, his movement small, cautious, as if he had just become an unintentional witness to something bigger than a simple transaction. Across the boutique, a woman in a designer coat glanced up from her own shopping, her gaze flickering between Salah and Daniel, catching the edge in the young associate's voice. They had all heard it. The unspoken judgment. The assumption. Daniel's face didn't change, but Salah could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Maybe he had meant to sound more polished, more professional, but the truth had slipped through, raw and unfiltered. Salah let the words hang between them for a moment, considering. Then, finally, he tilted his head slightly. What makes someone a serious buyer? His voice was still even, still patient, but there was something in it now. Something almost imperceptible. A quiet challenge. Daniel swallowed, just barely. He didn't answer. And in that moment, Salah knew. This wasn't about the watch. It never had been. Salah didn't break eye contact. He had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words. It made people uncomfortable, made them fidget, made them second-guess the things they had said without thinking, and Daniel was no exception. "How do you know I'm not a serious buyer?" Salah finally asked, his voice measured, steady. Daniel gave another one of those tight-lipped smiles, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. He exhaled sharply through his nose as if this conversation was a waste of his time. His fingers drummed lightly against the counter before he shrugged. Casual, dismissive. "Our clientele is a certain type." The pause between his words stretched just long enough to make his meaning clear. Salah had already known what Daniel thought of him the second he walked in. But now, the words hung in the air like the last piece of evidence in a case that had already been decided. "A certain type." Salah let the words settle, watching the way Daniel held himself. His chin slightly lifted, his arms folding across his chest. The practiced arrogance of someone who believed he had authority over moments like these. The air in the boutique had shifted again, the tension no longer something only Salah could feel. Nearby, the suited businessman who had been trying on watches had grown quiet, pretending to inspect a display but clearly listening. Another customer, a woman holding a velvet case, glanced toward them before quickly looking away. People had noticed. And Daniel had noticed that they had noticed. Across the store, a man in a crisp black blazer had been watching the exchange carefully, the boutique manager. He wasn't smiling. Without a word, he gave Daniel the smallest gesture, a flick of his fingers, subtle but clear. "Move on." Daniel's jaw tensed. He hesitated, but only for a second before turning his back to Salah, shifting his focus toward another customer. And just like that, it was over. At least Daniel thought it was. Salah, however, knew better. Because moments like this, they had a way of unfolding into something much bigger. Salah inhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. He had been here before. Not in this exact boutique, not with this exact man, but in this situation. The silent test, the unspoken judgment, the assumption that respect was something he needed to earn, rather than something he was owed like any other customer who walked through that door. He could argue. He could call Daniel out, could force him to acknowledge the mistake he had made, the bias in his words. But Salah wasn't interested in winning a petty exchange. That was never his style. Instead, he stepped back from the counter, calm, composed. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Daniel barely noticed. He was already engaged with another customer, his smile wider, his tone smoother now that he was serving someone who, in his mind, fit the store's image. He had already moved on, convinced the moment had passed. Salah's fingers moved quickly, a quiet call made with a few simple words. Then he waited. 5 minutes. That was all it took. The boutique door swung open and the atmosphere shifted instantly. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, his movements purposeful, his presence commanding. He wasn't just another customer, he was here for a reason. Daniel glanced up, immediately straightening when he recognized him. The store's regional director. Concern flickered across the manager's face as he moved to greet him. The other sales associates exchanged uneasy glances. Even the customers sensed it, the tension thickening, the shift in power. Salah said nothing. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, the store wasn't just about luxury watches anymore. It was about to become a lesson in something far more valuable. The boutique, once filled with the quiet hum of polite conversation and the soft ticking of luxury timepieces, now felt frozen in time. All eyes shifted toward the man who had just entered. Daniel stiffened, his posture turning rigid as he recognized the regional director, the very man who oversaw not just this boutique, but several across the city. The manager, standing a few steps away, straightened his jacket, clearly caught off guard. But what happened next sent a ripple through the room. Instead of heading toward the manager, the regional director walked straight to Salah. And then, in a move that shattered every assumption Daniel had made, the man extended his hand. "Mr. Salah," he said warmly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly who was standing before him. "It's an honor to have you here." Salah shook his hand, his expression unreadable, his movements measured. "Thank you," he said simply. The moment stretched. The air thickened. Daniel's face drained of color, his mouth opened slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. The easy confidence, the dismissive attitude, gone. His hands clenched at his sides, and for the first time since Salah had stepped into the store, he truly looked at him. Saw him. The shift in power was undeniable. A few of the customers exchanged glances, whispering to each other. The businessman Daniel had been helping earlier adjusted his watch, suddenly looking as though he wanted no part of what was unfolding. Even the manager, who had been too willing to let the moment slide before, now looked visibly uneasy. "I apologize if there were any issues," the regional director continued, his voice polite but firm, as if already sensing what had happened. "How can we assist you today?" Salah let the question hang for a moment, his gaze flickering toward Daniel, just briefly, just enough. Then he turned back to the director, and in that instant, everyone in the room understood. This wasn't about the watch anymore. It never had been. Salah didn't smirk, didn't gloat, didn't do what so many others in his position might have. He didn't throw Daniel's arrogance back in his face. Instead, he remained exactly as he had been since he walked into this boutique, composed, patient, and quietly unwavering. He turned his gaze back to the regional director, his voice steady. "I wanted to buy a watch," he said simply, "but it seems I wasn't the right type of customer." His words landed like a heavy stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through the room. The quiet murmurs between customers halted. The tension that had been building now settled like a thick fog. The regional director's polite warmth faded instantly. His expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he turned slowly to face Daniel. "Is that true?" The question wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through the air like a blade. Daniel paled. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He shifted on his feet, scrambling for something, anything, to say that would justify his actions, but nothing came. The weight of the moment had caught up with him. The businessman he had been helping earlier took a step back, suddenly disassociating himself from the scene. The manager, who had ignored the earlier interaction, now stood frozen, his own expression unreadable. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't mean..." The regional director didn't blink, didn't let him off the hook. "You didn't mean what exactly?" His voice was quiet, yet somehow more intimidating than if he had yelled. Daniel's fingers twitched. His practiced confidence had shattered, leaving behind nothing but the stark realization that he had made a mistake he couldn't take back. He had assumed, he had dismissed, and now he was about to face the consequences. The weight of the silence was suffocating. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing, his hands gripping the edge of the glass counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The regional director's stare didn't waver, sharp and unyielding, waiting for an answer that wasn't coming. Salah could have let the moment drag out, could have demanded an apology, could have made Daniel say the words aloud. "I judged you, I dismissed you, I assumed you were beneath me." But he didn't. He had already won the moment. So instead, he inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, and let his words do what his presence alone had already done. Turn the tables. "I won't be buying a watch today," he said, his voice calm, measured. "But I hope this store starts treating people with the respect they deserve." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his words carried through the boutique, landing like a verdict. No more was needed. The manager, who had stood passively in the background all this time, suddenly looked anywhere but at Salah, his face tight with the kind of regret that came too late. The businessman Daniel had been helping shifted awkwardly, checking his watch as if desperate to escape the tension. Even a couple of the other sales associates, who had stayed quiet throughout the exchange, exchanged uncertain glances as if realizing the lesson that had just unfolded before them. And Daniel didn't say a word. He didn't try to stop Salah, didn't offer a last-minute defense, didn't even attempt the hollow apology that might have saved face. Because in that moment, he understood. Some things couldn't be undone. Salah turned without another word and walked toward the door. Not a single person in the boutique stopped him. They just watched, silent. Because deep down they all knew this was the moment they would remember. Not the watches, not the luxury, not the false smiles of customer service, but the lesson, and the man who had taught it without ever needing to raise his voice. By the time Mohamed Salah reached his car, the world had already started talking. It started with a single post. A customer from the boutique, one who had stood quietly by, watching it all unfold, had taken to social media describing in detail how a store clerk had dismissed and judged Salah, only to be left speechless when the power in the room shifted. The post wasn't dramatic, wasn't exaggerated, just a simple retelling of what had happened. But it was enough. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. People reshared it, commented on it, dissected it. Some were furious, calling out the arrogance of luxury brands that treated wealth as a members-only club. Others were stunned, unable to believe that a global icon like Salah, a man who had accomplished more than most could dream of, could still be looked down upon just because he wasn't dressed to impress. And then came the backlash. The boutique's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. People flooded their social media pages with questions. Is this how you treat your customers? Would you have done the same if he had walked in wearing a suit? Apologize, or we take our business elsewhere. The pressure built quickly. The store had no choice. By midday, an official statement appeared on their accounts. We deeply regret the experience Mr. Salah had in our boutique. It does not reflect our values, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure this does not happen again. Our sincerest apologies. For many, it was too little, too late. As for Daniel, his fate was left uncertain. Some claimed he had been fired, a quiet casualty of the store's damage control. Others said he was sent for retraining, a word that sounded more like punishment than education. Either way, he had learned the hard way that assumptions had consequences. And Salah? He never addressed it, never tweeted about it, never spoke to the press. While the internet dissected every detail of what had happened, he simply went on with his day, just as he had planned. A quiet lunch with his family, a training session, a moment of stillness away from the noise, because for him, dignity had always been worth more than any watch.